Welcome back, y'all, to the Low Bottom High Rise podcast with me, Moira Casaba. And I am thrilled today to have the one and only Justin Schenck on the podcast today. Justin, you are one of the top podcasters, honestly, in the world. You have been ranked in Inc. magazine. There's a story there that we're going to want to share. You're doing so much just good work in the world. And, I feel like you are just a vessel for other people's voices, but also your own story. I got to see you speak at Amberly Lago's event. It was fun for me because I was in the background. I usually am speaking at those events. And because it was close to home, I got to drive up and sneak into the back. And your presentation just blew my mind, and everyone around me, and this just speaks to who you are as a human being. Everyone around me was like, you don't know Justin? You need to know Justin. I need to introduce you. And I am just thrilled to be able to share your story and your knowledge and your wisdom with my listeners. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, Moira, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the kind words. I actually, it was funny. I was speaking with Henry Amar yesterday.
And love that kid.
So we did a podcast swap. So this is how, we literally recorded yesterday. It's out today on my show, which was like a super fast turnaround for my team. They weren't too happy, but
I get that.
yeah. So he said, of course, kind things just like you did. And, growing up, I was somebody I was not very good at taking compliments.
Yeah.
And so to this day, it's still weird for me to hear them.
Totally get that.
I had to program myself to get to a point where I can just say thank you.
Yes.
And so thank you so much for saying those kind words, right? I used to have a joke. As my podcast really started to grow, I'd run into people and they'd be like, "Oh, I listen to your podcast." And I always used to go, you're the one, right? Like
right.
A joke of like, "Oh, you're the one person." But I realized it was like this self-deprecating type of behavior. And I'm sure we'll unpack some of that as we go through this conversation. But all of this rambling on to just say thank you so much for the kind words. It means a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to dig into how this all came to be. I know that just like you just said, whenever I get introduced on stages and stuff, I'm like, who are they talking about? There's all these accolades and titles, and I'm like, but I love to share that. And that's why the name of this podcast is Low Bottom High Rise, because it's so important, I think, to share the stories of the people that are like you, that are at the top of the freaking game, and to share where it all started and where it came from. And I'm so passionate about, kind of, if I can do it, you can do it, if people understood my mentality 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the struggles that I've had, and not just what they're seeing forward facing in the public eye, they would have so much more belief in themselves for what is possible. So I want to go back. Can you tell kind of that story of, who you used to be, who you've grown into, and how this journey came to be?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. This journey happened with intention, but by accident, right? Like I knew I always kind of wanted to be where I am now, but I had no idea. Obviously, when I had these thoughts of grandeur, right? When I was 19, 20 years old, podcasting didn't even exist. So the vehicle that I used in order to create the impact that I can in the world didn't even exist at the time, right? And so it was really accidental. But to go back, right, in high school, I always say if there's a senior superlative for least likely to succeed, it would have been me. I had a 1.7 GPA. My mom was in the middle of a 20-year opioid addiction, and my dad was in jail. And so when you look at all of that, like all signs pointed to you've got no shot, kid.
Right.
Like literal statistics based off of what are out there in the world, right? Your parents an addict, you have a 50% chance of being an addict. Your parents in jail, you're a 50% chance of ending up in jail. If you do the math, I'm 100% screwed, right? Like there's no way that I could get out of this. But I had one thing on my side. Well, two things on my side. One, my parents loved me unconditionally. They were my biggest cheerleaders, my biggest supporters. And I think when you can have that type of love as a child, it really can empower you in so many ways.
Yeah.
Number two, I had a massive sense of self-awareness at a very, very young age. I was very, very self-aware of everything, of myself, of everything that I was trying to really build in my life. Now, I didn't know where I wanted to go. Obviously, you're 16, 17 years old, like you don't know where you want to go. You might have some ideas.
Right.
But I knew where I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And I knew that I
Oh,
had to make choices in order to align myself the right way. And so obviously, if you have a 1.7 GPA in high school, you don't go to college.
right.
So I ended up getting a job in direct sales, which was the greatest gift. That's where I got
Yeah.
introduced to everything from public speaking to self-development. My mentor within the organization handed me a book that was called Who Moved My Cheese, and it spoke to me at the
Such
core,
a good
right?
one.
It's such a great book, and I always recommend it to everybody because it's a super easy read. So if you're not a
Yeah.
reader, just go read it. Like, it takes 45 minutes, right?
Yep.
But it spoke to me at the core because it's all about how life is going to change around you. But what matters is how you react to that change, and all those outside circumstances don't matter. And so at 19, I was given this book that said, hey, you have an opportunity to build the life that you want. And it's not based off what other people have done or what other people have said or what other people have chosen around you. Thus really began the journey for me. Tried to build multiple businesses, failed miserably. And so I decided, at the age of 29, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this podcast.
And
I was going to
podcasting
interview.
was really brand new back then.
It was, it's so funny. Like, I used to tell people like, oh, I have a podcast, and they would go, what's a podcast? Right.
Right.
And so like now I tell them I have a podcast and they go, oh, you have one too.
Right.
It's just one of those like roll your eyes types of things at this point. And it's really funny. And I love seeing the progression of the medium because it really changes lives, and it's on so many levels. And so I was like, let me interview entrepreneurs, pick their brain, and figure out what I'm doing wrong. Almost kind of create my own teachers and my own school, right?
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was 6 months before I launched the show, my mom lost her battle to opioids. And I don't want to say it was in that moment. I ended up, and we can get into this if you want, but I ended up going on a 3-month bender where I was blackout drunk 6 nights a week.
I can relate.
Literally, like, drink your face off, wake up in your bed and go, I have no idea how I got home type of bender, right?
Yeah.
And it was really me. You talk about self-awareness. I knew while I was doing it, I was just running from the pain, right? Running from the idea that I had to face this. But once I finally did, I was like, I had a coach at the time, and she called me and she's like, what are you doing tonight? And I said, well, I'm going out with some friends. And she goes, no, you're not. She's like, you're going to sit and you're going to feel this. And so I did. And the next day I woke up and I had this great immense weight off of my shoulders. But I realized 2 things. One, I realized my mom didn't die because she was an addict. My mom died because she didn't love herself.
Yeah.
And 2, I realized I didn't love myself either. And so the podcast became about that. Like, if you go back and listen to the first 2 years of the show, I was like, what's self-love to you and how do I get it? Right. Like, it was like literally me being like, feed me this information. And so, and obviously from there, a lot has taken off, and we can get into that too, if you want.
Yeah. God. So you just said so many things. One of the things you said,
sorry. I feel like I rambled
I'm like,
on.
there's just so much wisdom there. One of the things you said that I coach a lot of women through is they get really frustrated because they don't have the clarity of what they want to build or where they want to go or the path. And you said, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted, but I knew what I didn't want. And I think when we start to embrace that as a gift and see that that is such an incredibly powerful place to begin the journey, because I teach this concept of contrast clarity. Like, it's the contrast, it's what we don't want that points us in the direction of what we do want. But if we're negative and frustrated and pissed off about we can't figure it out, I'm like, then you're never going to get that like 2 millimeter shift to where the light bulb shines and you're like, oh my gosh, that's where I'm going. And I'm guessing that there was a whole lot along this journey, especially because way back, podcasting didn't exist. And then it did, but it was just putting one foot in front of the other, right? Because I know for me and my background, where my whole entire world changed was network marketing. It just opened up this growth world to me that I drank out of the freaking fire hose because I needed it so desperately. And, that's when everything in my life changed. But it was a whole lot of action taking when I had no idea what I was doing. It was listening to mentors, listening to coaches, listening to guides, telling me what to do. And I really think this is so much of what everyone is, the people that are frustrated, not where they want to be, they're lacking is just action. Right? Like, you're not going to have it figured out. You're not going to be able to see 200 yards ahead. You're going to be able to see 2 inches in front of you. And you just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
That's it. And so you mentioned something earlier when you first hit record about how, it's good to show the rise, right? The things that we had to overcome, the things when it didn't seem easy. etc. And it almost makes you relatable, right? So here's the reality. Like I also want people to look at me and go, well, if that guy could do it, I could do it too.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, like I'm still scared every time I try
Right.
something new.
Yes.
Like there's still fear in
Yeah.
the next big thing, right? I've hosted live events, I've started masterminds, I've hosted retreats, I've done all these things that they're big risks, especially when you host big events, because the cost is massive.
Yeah.
And you go, what if nobody shows up?
Right.
Right. Like I used to have, back in 2019, I did my first big event and I would have a reoccurring nightmare where I was standing at the registration table and nobody was showing up. Right.
Yeah.
Like great fear in it. But I realized this, when you understand your purpose,
Yeah.
it makes it a lot easier to walk into that fear, because if I have a purpose to make an impact in the world, which I believe my purpose is to let people know it doesn't matter where you come from and it doesn't even matter where you are today. What matters are the choices you make today to create a better tomorrow for yourself and the world. And so if I don't step into that fear or take the action needed, then I'm not living my purpose, right? And there's lives that could change if I do live my purpose. And I had the biggest realization very early on in the podcast game. So for the first year or so, nobody really listened. 50, 60 downloads an episode. And I didn't know at the time that 80% of shows do less than 100 downloads an episode.
Wow.
But so I was like, what is the point of this? Like I'm doing all this work. At the time I was still doing all the editing, getting my guests, doing all these things. And I was like, what's the point? And as I was thinking about shutting the show down, somebody from Japan reached out to me and said, because of your show, I decided not to take my life. And it was that moment where I said, okay, this is my calling. Yeah. I'm going to show up even if one person is listening. Right. Because look, we live in this world now where it's skewed by fake numbers and grandiose things and, million followers on Instagram and this and that and the other thing. Like if we didn't have social media and I told you that 100 people would show up to listen to you speak every single week, would you show up?
Like in a room. That's what I always think. Like picture those numbers in a room, 50 people, 100 people. That's a hell of a lot of people.
It changed the game. And now, now my show does really well, fortunately. But again, that took consistency, that took finding my voice, that took being authentic. And it took a lot of time to grow it. But if I gave up back then, imagine not only what my life would look like, but what would the life of others look like? And so I always say, like, feel the fear, but do it anyway, right? Like you have 100%. To take the action in order to live the life that you're meant to live. Even if you're not sure what it is, right? Like just try new things and then try them consistently and see if it works out.
Yeah. I think the entrepreneurial journey is literally a daily pivot, especially with social media. If we're posting on social media, it's like, well, that didn't really work. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do this. It's like everybody wants the one answer. Show me exactly what to do. And then I'm going to do that thing and it's just going to go. And I'm like, no. You're going to do 1,000 different things forever. It doesn't matter if you get to that point where you're technically on the mountaintop, you're still pivoting. You're still learning. Just like you said, you're still fearful. Like successful people don't lose the fear. They just have flexed the muscle to walk through it. Right. And I love what you said about that one message from the guy in Japan, because I think that's what is missing sometimes too for people. It's like connecting to their purpose, connecting to my goal is actually to serve. My goal is to impact. My goal is to just do this work in the world. And, it's funny. Somebody messaged me yesterday about a surf trip and they were like, do you surf? And I was like, well, I learned somewhere along the road to count it as a win if I got in the water, right? Like it is like, that's my win. It's not, did I surf 50 waves well? It's like, did I get in the water? And it's the same thing in business. It's like, did I show up and serve? Did I, record the podcast? Did I create the social media post to impact, to create change, to hopefully help someone? And you have to put your head on the pillow at night and say, I'm successful because of the impact, not I'm successful because of the metrics.
Yeah. I have a dear friend named Brian Bogert who often says, and I don't know if it's necessarily his quote, but I always like to give credit where I hear it from. But he often says, I'd rather go through pain now than suffer for the rest of my life.
Yes.
And so to understand a minute moment of pain, a minute moment of discomfort, to push through that barrier, to understand that you're going to live a life that and I always like to say a life that you're meant to live, right? In the self-development space, we live in a world where they tell you that you should be like me. And it's exhausting and I hate it. But the reality is, like, how can I allow you to live the life that you're meant to live? And honestly, if the life that you want to live is, being a great parent and, living for the week, working for the weekends and doing all that, great. I support that. Like, my job is not to tell you what you're meant to do, but if you feel like you're being called to do something greater, that moment of discomfort is going to be worth every single second for the rest of your life. And I often think about that stuff. Like, there are moments where, in our space, and I don't know if you host events, Maura, but in our space, sometimes we ask big asks. And it's very, very uncomfortable. And, but I know that if I get that person in the right room, or I make that connection, whatever, a life will shift. Life will change, life will grow. So I'm going to get uncomfortable. I'm going to jeopardize some things. I'm going to see what I can do to make it a bigger impact. And so I think that, again, finding your purpose is the key to getting uncomfortable. And then once you get uncomfortable, the rest takes care of itself.
Yes. And you said something earlier that I want to clarify, because I feel like I'm working with a lot of women just like right now with this. They're like, well, I know my purpose. Like, they kind of have clarity around the greater calling, but they're like, but I don't know the how. I don't know what that looks like. Am I, one-on-one coaching? Am I doing group coaching? Like, in what capacity am I supposed to do this purpose? And that's where I'm like, you just got to try it. Like, you got to try it a million different ways. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a book, maybe it's a coaching program, but you aren't going to figure it out sitting in your living room pondering it. You only figure it out through action. You only get good at the thing through action, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%. So I years ago, I did a solo episode of my podcast called Find Your Mouse. And we talk about Walt Disney, right? Walt Disney drew Mickey Mouse after his old character got stripped away from him and he felt lost, and he was on a train ride out to, I think, California or something. And he drew Mickey on this train ride out. And obviously now we know the history of Disney. It's one of the biggest companies in the world. More people probably know Disney than any other brand in the world. And it all started with a mouse, right? So you have to find your mouse. My mouse was a $60 microphone that I bought when I started a podcast 7 years ago. Your mouse it could be a book. It could be speaking on stages. It could be a blog, whatever, but you have to try. And then to take it a step further, you have to try consistently. Like, it's not like, okay, hey, I launched one podcast episode, nobody listened, so that's not it. No, like, part of it is like, hey, give it a try. If you are enjoying it and it's fun, keep doing it. And that could absolutely 100% be your vehicle to grow an audience, to teach, to make an impact. And then when it comes to group and one-on-one, I hate one-on-one coaching. Very, very rarely will I ever bring that into my space. But it's one of those things that, like, I had to do one-on-one coaching first before I figured out, like, this is not for me. And so you have to try different things.
I feel like for me, it's like, I will get clear on something and I'll get super stoked about it and be like, this is it. And so you kind of want to get to that point where you're like full steam ahead with the podcast or whatever it is you're doing. But then, like you said, often I'm like, and no, this isn't it. It's like, but I can't figure that out before I'm actually in it. So here's a really good question for you, because I actually think about this a lot and I don't know if I know the answer. There's part of this world that we're like, you got to stay consistent on the days you don't want to. You got to stay consistent when you want to give up. You got to stay consistent when it sucks. But when is the point that we should actually go, I don't want to do this anymore? I think something else is calling, because I think that's a kind of a messy area that's hard to, stick with. Say somebody is in either, we could say, the podcast world or the network marketing world, and it's just not working for them. But all they're hearing is, don't quit on a bad day. You got to stay consistent. And they're like, I'm so confused. I'm supposed to follow my purpose. I don't know what that is. You told me to take action before I knew what that was. This isn't really panning out. When do you have any clarity or answers around that?
It's a really good question. And I think here's the thing, right? I think it's hard to come up with a blanket answer to that, because it's such an individual question. right? You talk about network marketing, you've had great success in that space. And I applaud anybody who's had great success in that space. But I also see people all the time, every 3 weeks, they're at a different network marketing thing, right? And or a different company or whatever. And you're like, well, clearly these are two separate types of people. And maybe network marketing just isn't the thing, right? For that individual that jumps every 3 weeks to the next one. But the problem is you really have to assess, am I doing the actual work or am I saying I'm doing the work? That's the difference, right? And that's why it's an individual's question, because the reality is I can sit in my office all day. Well, whether I do work or not is the other answer, right? Like I'm done work most days around 2 p.m. And the reason I'm done work most days around 2 p.m. is because I'm really efficient. Like I just do the things I need to do and then I'm done, right? And there's certain days where I don't want to do it. So here's what I do in those days. And maybe this might help somebody out. If I don't want to work on something, or say I don't want to work out, or I don't want to do something, right? I will literally put my phone on do not disturb, and I will commit 15 minutes to taking real action in that space, right? To lifting the weights, to going on a run, to whatever. And I'll do 15 minutes of it. And at the 15-minute mark, if I feel like I don't want to do it, I'll stop.
I love that.
But 9 times out of 10,
you don't stop.
I get 15 minutes in. I'm like, I'm knocking this shit out. I'm just going to finish. Right. Like, so you just stay focused on it. And so I love the 15-minute rule in those moments of like, I don't feel like I want to do this. Right. Like in sales or network marketing or whatever, the cold outreach, right? Like the scary ass cold outreach. Cool. Put it on do not disturb. 15 minutes of truly doing it, right? I was in sales. It wasn't network marketing, but it was very build your leads, do it all yourself. The worst part was setting appointments and making phone calls. So I had to I actually would go in the office and I would lock myself in the closet in the office and I would just make phone calls and I would do it for 15 minutes at a time and be like, all right, am I feeling this or am I not feeling this?
Right.
And so I think you have to assess and again, be self-aware. We keep going back to self-awareness. But be self-aware. Like, are you actually doing the work or are you saying you're doing the work?
Right.
Like when you're trying to build a business, you putting a post on social media isn't enough.
No.
Like I don't care how many followers you have. Like I have clients that have real millions of followers, not bought millions of followers. And they'll post them. They'll be like, Justin, I still got to reach out to people. I still have to put in the work. I still have to do the one-on-one reach. And so, you have to put in the work.
I love that clarity of asking yourself, are you really doing the work? Because most people in that situation really aren't, and you can be exhausted from an 8-hour day, but not have done the things that actually move the needle so much. And I love what you said about 15 minutes because it's kind of a mind trick, right? It is a mind trick. And it's like one of those things you pull out that you're like, this is how I do it. And I very much do that. It's like I get super clear in the morning, like what are the 2 or 3 most important things I got to do? And we had to record at 10 a.m. and it's 9 a.m. I'm sitting like unshowered, hadn't put any makeup on. And I'm like, okay, I've got to knock out these 2 things by 9:30 so that I can like go look halfway decent and get on camera. Like, it's like these time chunks that I'm like, why? And you said it earlier, experience the pain now for the pleasure later. I was like, I don't want to do this stuff at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I'm like, just freaking rip the Band-Aid off, get it done. But there are always going to be parts of your business, because I think that's the other thing. People think like, oh, if I can get there and I can be in this dream place. I don't care how dreamy you think it is. There are parts of everything that suck, and you have to embrace the suck sometimes. But
I actually said this quote yesterday on a podcast. Like Biggie Smalls said it best, right? Mo money, mo problems. Like, I guarantee you, the more success you have, you're still going to have problems. They're just different problems, right?
Absolutely.
And so, there's always that next thing you have to push through, that next thing, right? I talk a lot about limiting beliefs and the fact that we all have them. And the reason I say that we all have them is there's a lot of people in this world that people put on pedestals that I happen to have built friendships with. And I can tell you that they have limiting beliefs just like you and I. It might not be around the fact that somebody can, click the follow button on their thing, or the fact they can't make $1 billion, or the fact, whatever, but it could be, hey, am I a good father? Am I able to be a good father? Am I able to be a good husband? Am I able to truly be a good friend? did this money make me fake? Like all these limiting
Yeah.
beliefs
Yes.
that they could possibly have, they still have them.
Yeah.
There's no like, I've arrived.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the beauty of life, right? Because the goal of this life is to grow
Yeah.
every single day, to become a better you every single day, because there is no arrival. And I can tell you for a fact, like look, here's the thing. If you tell me your goal is to make $1 million, I champion that. Please go make $1 million, right? But I promise the second you get to that million, you're going to go, okay, now how do I make 10?
Right.
Right. There's
It's
no
never,
end.
there's never an end. Absolutely.
Never. And it's the human condition, right? Like
Yeah.
there's like this always this need and this want for more. The reality was, to rewind back into my story, when I had that realization of like, oh, I don't love myself either. I realized that I was chasing entrepreneurship, the money, the car, the girl, the everything else, because society told me as a white man in America that if I got those things, then all of a sudden I would be happy.
Yeah.
Right. But it was the exact opposite. I had to go internal to find that happiness. And once you're able to do that internal part, the money becomes easy. The relationships become easy.
Right.
It's really about figuring out and rewiring that inside of you.
Yes. 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 Oh my gosh. So much. Like I was just thinking about when you were talking about there's always more and there's always a learning curve and there's always battles. I was backstage with Brendan Bouchard and he had just walked off stage. I feel like Brendan is probably live wise the best speaker I've ever seen. And I love seeing the man speak. And he came backstage and he was so human. I mean, Brendan is like, so real, but he was like, I messed up the slides. I didn't have the clicker right. I think I like messed up that story. And I was like, his thought process coming off stage and, he's not being like hard on himself. He's not down. He's just kind of making observations, but I'm like, wait, the greatest speaker in the world, like messes his slides up and does everything, all these things wrong. And it's just so refreshing. And I think that's sometimes what you and I have had the great experience to have these amazing conversations with these incredibly successful humans that so many people admire. They're just real people too, with the same struggles. And going back to what you said about what keeps me going all the time is like, I have to care more about other people than I do my own ego, is what I always say. So in those moments where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this big ask, or I don't want to share this vulnerable thing. I'm like, there are a million Moiras out there that are at rock bottom, which I have been at, that are depending on me to show up. And I have got all the trust and faith in the world in that. And that my message can help. And that just gets me over my shit in an instant, because so we have to take the focus off of us. And I think we are in such a society where it is all about us. It is all about our numbers. It is all about our followers. It is all about the money. And it's like, just like you said, when you pursue passion and service, game over on the money. Like it just comes, right? It comes, the success will come, and you got to work smart. You got to work in those 15-minute increments. I really want to go back to your story. I love that you talked about self-love kind of being the thing that was lacking. And so in those first couple of years in the podcast, like what did that journey look like for you? When were those kind of moments of, transformation? What did that look like?
Yeah. Obviously a couple things, right? There was not one moment where I was like, oh, I figured it out.
Yeah.
What I realized was a couple things when we talk about trying to figure out self-love, right? Number one is to go easy on yourself. I talk about the 5 people to surround yourself with, right? The cheerleader, the bruiser, the softie, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
And I'm a bruiser. And so the unfortunate part is when you're a bruiser and in your head all the time, like nothing is ever quite enough. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, as you ask these types of questions to men and women, they would vary, right? Women were very much soft about it, right? Very, very, hey, you have to take some time for yourself. You have to be easy on yourself. You have to be forgiving. And men were very much like, you have to build structure, right? You have to make sure you're doing this, 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 and this. And so I think that I took a little pieces of both, right? Although at times I'm still hard on myself, I found a great balance in like the understanding that like, it's okay, right? Like if your vision didn't come to full fruition, like it's okay, right? You have to accept it, right? This is how it's meant to be, like that whole mindset. But more importantly, I found that as a serving driven entrepreneur, like most of us are, especially in the podcast space, we tend to pour into other people all the time, right? Like we will forget ourselves. We will give until there's nothing left to give.
Yeah.
And so I ask a question every single guest on my show, and this was really the answer to self-love. And I didn't realize it until years later. The first part of the question that I ask is, what's your definition of success? The second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself? And somebody asked me a question years ago and said, what's a common theme with all the people that you interview? Like, you mind, I interview comedians and actors and reality stars and entrepreneurs and like all these people. They come from all walks of life.
Yeah.
But I realized the common theme was from that question. And the 3 things they did every single day were to serve themselves in some way, shape, or form, whether it be meditation or working out or whatever, right? Like they would do those things. And when I started to implement, I now have 4 non-negotiables every single day. But when I started to implement that, the loving myself became easier because all of a sudden my cup was full. And when your cup is full, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, you know what? Things are going well. Like, this is good. Like, life is good. And when I spoke at the event, I talked about how I just got married a month ago. So it was like 3 weeks out from the wedding.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And for the longest time, my lack of self-love really reflected into my love relationships. And then I finally got to a point through coaches and all these other things that I loved myself and I loved my life and I was cool with being single and I didn't attach my worth to a relationship and all these things. And then I met my now wife and I was like, really? Once I got to the point where I was happy alone, but the secret was because I was happy alone, I got to attract the wife that I needed.
Right.
And so, self-love is really the answer to all the world's problems. I really feel like it's tough because I think it's an individual thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, but if the world could figure out self-love, which makes it easier to love others, which makes it easier to not want conflict, which makes it easier to not disrupt the path we're supposed to be living.
Yeah.
I think that this world would be healed, like literally healed. No war, no anything, right? No addiction. And so I'm glad I figured it out for me. And I hope that if I don't give tips and tricks for people to figure it out for themselves, I hope I inspire them to do the work that they need to figure it out.
Yeah. I love that. I really want to know what your 4 non-negotiables are though. What are those? Let's go back to that.
Yeah. So the first one is I move my body in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a morning walk with my wife or lifting weights or whatever, right? I told you get the hat because I just finished my workout right before we hit record. So moving my body in some way, shape, or form. The second thing is I do a daily visualization practice where I tie my vision into my emotions.
Yes.
So all my emotions, all of my senses, and I get to picture where I'm going. And it could be as simple as, hey, I've got an interview with Moira today. What do I want the outcome to be like? What's the emotion, right?
Yes.
Or big vision, right? Like, where do I see myself at 70? Like, what's that feel like?
Yeah.
The third thing is I learn something new every single day. So whether that's in a conversation, reading a book, listening to a podcast, whatever, I learn something new every single day. And then the fourth one is I reach out to somebody I care about every single day and just let them know I'm thinking about them. And when I say that last one, everybody's always like, but that's filling somebody else's cup. Like, you're saying you're thinking about them or whatever, but it fills my cup to know that I can be there for somebody and I'm in a position where I can be there for somebody. And what I've found is, doing this for so long now, there's very few days I go without getting a text from somebody that says, hey, how's everything going? And it has become this great reciprocal thing that I've been able to accidentally build. And those 4 things are my non-negotiables. It's not a huge morning routine. 2 of those things can take 5 minutes.
Right.
And so for me, it's like, this fills my cup. And as long as I check those off my box every day, at night, I lay my head on the pillow and go, today was a win. And then of course there's wins in between too.
That is like, I love checklists. I love, that's how my brain works. And those 4 things, I mean, if you do those every single day, there's no way to not have a happy life. It's like, I think you just nailed the secret to a happy life. And I also love that when you said move my body, it wasn't, I do a 60-minute, hardcore, whatever, that there's so much grace in there. And I think that's even for that one particular thing out of the 4, I want people to recognize like where the self-love is in there, because sometimes self-love is getting your butt out of bed and putting in a hardcore workout. Like, sometimes that's the most loving thing you can do. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let yourself sleep and go for a 20-minute leisurely walk with the dog. It doesn't look the same every single day. it's always different. And it's like, I love to I always talk about like the ceiling and the floor. And I think it's Trent Shelton that talks about that. I'm like, hold yourself to this crazy ceiling that in the world's most perfect day, you're going to freaking knock it out of the park and you're going to do that insane workout and you're going to feel really good about yourself, but you got to have a floor. You've got to have your non-negotiable that you're still giving to yourself, but this is your non-negotiable. Go for a walk with the dog. I also want to ask you about your visualization practice, because I teach this process called VPM3. And I always talk about manifesting being 3 parts: see it, feel it, and take action. And I think sometimes people are forgetting about the feel it part or the see it part or the action part, right? They're just like, writing down, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm like, not that easy. There's a little bit more to it. But what do you do for your visualization practice? Do you listen to something guided? How do you do that? I'm sure it looks a little different every day.
It looks a little different every day. When I'm really intentional about it, meaning like, hey, I really want to get something locked in. I want this big vision to come to fruition.
Yes.
I'll play certain music, certain songs that will pump me up in some way, shape, or form, or make me feel emotion. And I simply just close my eyes and I envision what it would look like, feel like, smell like, what the emotional tie to it would be. And I literally, again, I tie in all of my senses. And there are moments, there are times where when I'm visualizing long-term things and I'm an old man, like my eyes get teary, right? Like, because I'm there. And so the power of that is really this, right? Because look, I understand the spiritual side of things. Like, I've explored it. I've done it. I've done, energy healings and all the things in between. Yeah. But here is but I hate the spiritual side of things of like, oh, just think it and it'll happen. And, and if it doesn't happen, the universe didn't want you to have it. Like, that's not how that works. Right. But when you tie all of those things, all of your senses and your emotions to it, you want to get there so bad that the action becomes easy. Yeah. It's easy to pick up the phone and make that phone call. It's easy to put in the work. It's easy to do the things that are uncomfortable because I go, well, I want that. And I'm not going to have that in my life if I don't do this, 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 and this. And so that for me is the power of visualization. It just makes it easier to take that first step or that next
1,000%.
step. And so that's really my process. So again, it's different, a little bit different every day. I've found that some of my greatest, visualization practices have been when I'm driving. I obviously don't close my eyes. But if you're in the car by yourself, crank that music that's inspiring you and it makes you feel like you're in that spot. And just visualize everything. Like when I look at like my events that I've done, right? Yeah. So 2019 was my first big event. 200 people came, like Fabio Viviani from Top Chef spoke and Albie Manzo from Real Housewives of New Jersey. And I'm just like this guy trying to figure it out. Like I was a year into being an entrepreneur. Like it was like quick. Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to do this thing. And I visualized it every single day. Yeah. What's it look like? How many people do you want there? Who's on the stage, what music is going to be involved, the whys, everything else in between. And the only thing that was off from my vision to reality were the screens that they used behind the stage were smaller than I wanted them to be. And I said this to like the audio people, the people who set it up, and they're like, oh, we could have made them bigger. I'm like, come on. Right. So literally everything else went off without a hitch. And somebody walked up to me that morning before the event started and they said, hey man, you nervous? I go, no, I've already done it 10,000 times. Yes. And it was probably the only time before I spoke at anything that I was not nervous. Yeah. And it was just because this has been, it wasn't just a year of visualization. This was a lifetime of visualization to that 2019 event. Yes. And so yeah, it's a powerful thing. When you can lock it in, it's a very powerful thing.
I hope that people are really taking this and not just doing what frustrates me. It's like listening to podcasts all day long and then not taking action. This is what we're talking about, people. Visualization is key. I mean, it is such a powerful part. I think we spend an insane amount of time listening to podcasts, reading books, but then we're never doing the 2-minute daily action that has the power to change it all. I did it this morning at that 9:30 mark when I was like, shit, I gotta go. I gotta get ready. I'm like, did my 2 15-minute things. And then I was like, I want to visualize. So same thing. I pulled up a song, shut my eyes. I read my vision real quick, shut my eyes. I didn't even listen to the whole song. I hit pause and hop to the next thing, but I got 2 minutes in. Like that's how quickly you can sneak in. I just got to see it for a minute. I just got to see it and I got to feel it. And just like you, and this is because I know this is where people get caught up, but how do I do it? And what do I picture? And it's like, you can't do it wrong,
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm picturing things 20 years out. Sometimes I'm picturing the day. Sometimes I'm picturing where I want to end the year. It doesn't matter. Like, there aren't details that need to be right or wrong. It's just whether you're doing it or not. Are you pregnant or are you not pregnant? Are you doing it or you're not doing it? There's no wiggle room there.
Yeah.
Just do it. Just do it.
That's it. Yeah.
So
It's
good.
true.
So good. Yeah. Let's go back to the podcast, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Talk to us, because I know there's so many people out there that want to launch a podcast that do feel like that's an avenue for their purpose, an avenue for them to kind of get their work out into the world, but they're just locked up, right? Like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know where to begin. That was me. I mean, I know my first podcast episode was, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Why am I wearing headphones when I have a mic in front of me? Like, I don't understand any of this, but I'm walking through the fear. But do you have some advice for people in the podcast world that want to, I think, first off, want to start a podcast, but then also people out there with podcasts on how to scale that?
Yeah. So podcasting is still very much a part of my world. I own two companies that are involved within the podcast space. One, we create social media content that's algorithm friendly for podcasters. And the other one, we help people with the launch process. But here's the thing. So first of all, I loved what you said about people like, oh, I just don't know what to do. I don't blah, blah, blah. So here comes the bruiser and Justin, like, excuses are the nails that built the house of failure, right?
Yes.
Like,
say that again. Say that again.
Excuses are the nails that built the house of failure.
Oh, so good.
And so you going, I don't know how to do it. That's an excuse, right? Like 7 years ago when nobody was podcasting, I still found an online course of how to record, how to upload, how to edit, how to do all those things. Now it's free on Google, right? So that's an excuse. So many people come to me and they launch their show as they work through some of our companies and they go, oh my God, I wish I started this 5 years ago when I thought about it. Right. And so, I look at the success I have in the podcast space and I go, it's because I started 7 years ago.
Right.
And so imagine if you started 7 years ago when you first told me you wanted to start a podcast.
I wish that I had started it 7 years ago.
Yeah. So look, here's my advice and actual tips, right? Number one, don't overthink it, right? Yeah. Like, so many people are like, well, what equipment do I need? How much is that going to cost? Blah, blah, blah. I literally built an Inc. magazine top podcast with a $60 microphone. Now I've upgraded since then, but like, that's what I've built it on. Like the first number of years, it was a $60 microphone and we started on Skype. I don't even know if anybody uses Skype anymore. So like now we're on Zoom, right? We've upgraded. And so that's number one, right? Don't overthink it. Number two is when you launch a show, you want to give people a taste of what you're bringing to the table. The biggest, and I always share this tip because it was a huge mistake I made. When I launched the podcast, I released one episode day one, and that was it. But you want to give people a reason to subscribe. So you have to understand behaviors of podcast listeners. One, they're binge listeners. They will listen to many, many episodes back to back. Like, people find my show now and they're like, I've listened to every single episode in the last 3 months. Like, I have over 450 episodes. Like, you're insane. Wow. Right?
That's crazy.
So they're binge listeners. Number two, they want to make sure that you're going to stick around and you're in it for the long haul. So understand that it's a long game. Right. Yeah. And so you want to release multiple episodes day one and then commit to it.
And I didn't do that, by the way. So like, failure over here, but I'm still podcasting, right? Like, we also made all these mistakes. We're trying to help you.
Yeah. And the reality was, like, I made these mistakes, which is why I share these tips now, right? Like, I didn't do it the right way. Yeah. And it took me a really long time to build an audience, but and then on the flip side is like, commit to a year. If you're going to do it, say, I'll do 52 episodes, right? Like, that's easy. That's a simple 52 episodes. I'm committing to this, and then see where it goes. And so as far as like scaling and growing and all that stuff, I take a completely different approach about podcasting now than I ever did before. The reason is I used to teach how to grow an audience, right? Like the tips of like certain things on social media and guesting on other podcasts. And these things do work. It's just a little bit harder now because it's a much more crowded space than it was 5 years ago. So I always say, look at the 3 Ps of podcasting. One, build a platform, right? Show up the right way. Like, is your branding on point? Is your social media on point? Is everything look professional? Are you matching the people that are truly the big names in the space, right? Joe Rogan, Lewis Howes, those people. Yeah. Does it look as good as them? Number two is positioning. Like, are you connected with the right people to help raise your profile, right? Like, Gabby Bernstein's been on my show twice. I had a company reach out to me and say, hey, we want to sponsor your show because you've had Gabby on.
Right.
They never asked me my download numbers. They paid me more than what my per 1,000 downloads would be.
Right.
And it was a win-win for everybody, right? So are you
Yeah.
positioning yourself the right way by having the right guests on? And then the third thing is partnership, right? Like you want to get rewarded for the work you're doing, right? So are you creating the right partnerships? Like the last partnership I brought onto my show, they signed on for 12 episodes over the course of 6 months. And they paid me $20,000. When I did the math on like per 1,000 downloads, they should have paid me $3,800. So when you build a platform and you position yourself the right way, people will pay you for that because you've built a strong community, whether it's 100 people or 10,000 people. Like if you've built a strong community, people will pay you for that. And from that standpoint, it gives you more fuel to add to the fire of the purpose that you're trying to drive. That's why you need to get paid, because you have something really important to say. And that's why you have a podcast. And so if you get paid to do it, it makes it easier to continue to perform and reach more people and make a bigger impact. That's just the reality.
I love that. I'm hesitant to ask this question, but that means I'm going to ask it, right? Because I should, because I truly have never scratched the surface, nor I just don't think it's worth my time to think about like what do podcasts look like monetarily on the big end of things, because for me it is so like just my passion project and I freaking love it so much. And I also make enough money elsewhere that I'm like, I just want to give this to the world. I just want to show up and serve in this way. But so this is a question from me, but also for my audience to also encourage them, because so often I have started to pursue something out of passion. And then I've been like, holy shit, I think this is like, this could be big, like, and I think that's a cool thing to be able to come into different revenue streams that way. But what does this look like for top podcasters? I don't even know the business behind podcasting really.
It's again, it's a forever evolving and changing thing. Thanks to good old John Lee Dumas, the price point of what people would pay you for a sponsorship is not enough. I think it's something like $23 per every 1,000 downloads. Now, I told you earlier that 80% of shows are doing less than 100 downloads an episode.
Right.
So what you're saying is your 100 people that will literally jump through hoops for you and buy whatever you want them to buy are worth $2.30 to a sponsor. That's why I talk partnership versus sponsorship. It's a completely different ballgame. Now, when you're looking at like high level, right now, there's celebrities in the game. You've got the Joe Rogans of the world. You've got all these people. They are more about building long-term partnership, right? Spotify paid Joe Rogan over $100 million just for him to be just on their platform. There's also a number of other ones through they pulled people away from Barstool Sports and paid them $60 million. And
will you clarify real quick though, partnership versus, you said partnership versus sponsorship, like that's what you said, right?
Yeah. So sponsorship is
so defining
like, okay,
that for the audience here.
Yeah. So sponsorship is, hey, like we're going to pay you CPM, which is per 1,000 downloads or 1,000 listens. That's a sponsorship. A partnership to me is like, hey, I'm going to take care of you. You're going to take care of me.
Right.
What does that look like? Right. Like, yeah, we'll run ads, but are there other opportunities for us is it an email? Is it a social media? Is it a connection? Is it an introduction? Like all those things. It's really about, hey, I'm in this with you instead of you just paying me to slap an ad up. Right. Like I'm not a radio station. I only bring people on. I only take money from people with companies that I believe in. Like I get reached out to all the time of people be like, hey, we want to sponsor your show. I'm like, no, like I would never use your product. I would I'd never care for like any of this stuff. So no. And
I applaud you for that. Thank you, by the way. Thank you. Because being in this social media space, I made a decision maybe 6 or 9 months ago that I was like, I'm just not even doing brand partnerships anymore. I was like, it's pulling me away from the work that I'm supposed to be doing in the world. Now, if something came along that I was like obsessed with, then I'll talk, we'll have a conversation. But I literally took that lucrative revenue stream completely away from myself because I just wasn't willing to play the game anymore. I'm like, this feels so inauthentic and I don't want to do it, So and there's just a lot of noise out there with money where people are promoting things and sounding like they're super passionate about it, but it's an exchange,
Yeah, no, 100%. Like I had a company called BioOptimizers reach out to me. And I looked into them and they had a product that I was interested in. And I was like, look, the only way you can sponsor my show is if I try this product first. because I was like looking for a sleep aid, and they have magnesium that they say is like the best magnesium to help you sleep.
Yeah.
And I was like, so send me some magnesium. Let me try it out for a month. And then if it works, we'll run some ads. And it's an amazing product. By the way, I don't know how much they sold on the back end from my show, but like they've sold enough to me to more than pay for whatever, because once the sponsorship ran up, I now pay for it. And like, I literally have like 6 bottles in my closet.
Well, I'm going to order it as soon as we get off this, because my brain won't stop at night. And I mean, I was up to like 1:30 last night. Like, I can't turn it off. I'm exhausted and I just can't turn it off. Yeah.
Yeah. So my big thing with sleep was I could fall asleep fairly okay, but it was staying asleep. I'd wake up and then my brain would start going. Yeah. So magnesium helps you stay asleep.
Yeah.
And so I take it 2 hours before bed, and then I sleep really, really, really well when I do that. So highly recommend that. Anyway, there's another ad for BioOptimizers.
Yes.
But like, I had to try the product first before I brought it on. And honestly, like, I also make enough money outside of the podcast. Like, it's always just kind of like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. There's an extra stream of income for a short period of time or whatever. I really just run ads for my own company, Pod Brand, but that's that. And so that helps me either way. But my whole thing is like, I listen to some of these podcasts. I'm like, oh my God, like, how many ads are you going to throw in the beginning of this thing?
Yes,
like I refuse to do that. I will only put 1 ad per episode, like all those types of things. And so yeah, I just try, and if it feels good, I do it. If it doesn't, I don't.
Right. Well, and I just want to throw this out there before we wrap on this note, because I've had brands reach out to me and say, you'll get the product, Wednesday afternoon. We want you to post on Thursday, Monday. And I'm like, it's skincare. Like, you want me to use it one time for 6 hours and then post about it? Like, that's the world. Yeah. And I have been like, hard no, absolutely hard no. And then they're pissed, and I'm like, this is not something I can get behind. So I just want to throw that out there, so listeners kind of understand the world of what they're being influenced into. Sometimes it's authentic, sometimes it's absolutely not.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I don't want this to end. How have we talked this long? So
I know, this is great. I just looked at the clock too. I was like,
I know, I just looked up. I was like, how did that happen? So I'm going to turn your question around on you. So, well, you kind of shared your 4 things, so that takes it out of the game. But because those 4 things: move, visualize, grow, learn, reach out to somebody. I mean, I want everyone to take that into their life. But how would you define success?
So how I define success is I want to be able to do what I want, when I want, with who I want. And I know that's an answer a lot of people say, but the reality is, like, the most important piece of that is who I want. And I've been really, really, really intentional with surrounding myself with the right people in my life. Long-term friends. Like, I got married a month ago. My 4 groomsmen, the shortest friendship out of my 4 groomsmen was 18 years. And so
I always say that says so much about somebody. And when for those of us that have kids, you better make sure the spouse that they pick has long-term friendships, because that says so much about someone.
Yeah. So I always say it speaks volumes to them that they've put up with me for so long. Right. And so I feel blessed to have that, but then to be really intentional of like, who are the people that I spend the most time with? Who are the people that I choose to walk forward with me in this life? And I get to pour into them and they pour into me. And so to know that I have the right people surrounding me at all times is the greatest gift that I can have in this life. And then I've been able to build a life where I pretty much get to do what I want, when I want, pretty much all the time. Not 100% of the time, but we're getting dang close. Like I would say in the next 5 years, I hope to not have to work. And what I mean by that is, like, if I want to do something, I'll do it. Right. So really, like, completely sit down at a desk, work off my plate. Because, that's the life I've always wanted to build. And that also means I have the financial freedom to do what I want, and so many more things in between.
Absolutely. I love that answer. Well, Justin, thank you so much. Thank you for all your wisdom. This episode was like just magic. So much goodness. Thanks for being on. Thanks for just being in my life. And it's been a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you. This was great. I look forward to staying connected and see where our friendship goes.